Our forefathers evolved some 2.5 million years ago, and our own history starts only 200,000 years ago. This is when Homo sapiens evolved in Africa. Our forefathers then migrated out of Africa, all over the world, and finally as far up north as the Arctic Circle and the North Pole, where they settled down 36,000 years ago when the climate there was warmer. 10,000 years ago, the glacial period ended, and the white-skinned Aryan people who lived above the Arctic Circle, in what is today the northern territories of Finland, started moving south, and arrived in the paradise of their dreams 7,000 years ago, where they encountered their black-skinned Dravidian counterparts that had migrated north from Africa, that in turn was turning dry and inhospitable because of the same climate change. The Aryans and the Dravidians met in paradise by the monsoon rivers of Sarasvati and Hagar, and created together the Harappan civilization. The Sanskrit language, the caste system, the holy scriptures of the Vedas, and the first pantheon of deities that described the awe they had for the monsoon climate. The priests invented a creator god called Brahma, who brought water to his river wife, the goddess Sarasvati. A god called Vishnu, who maintained the rivers at peace for a while, and finally the destroyer god Shiva, who dried up the rivers, until Brahma again brought the massive rains and started the next cycle. This first paradise existed 6,000 years ago, and according to several historians, the Jewish people descended from these Brahmin priests. These Brahmin Jewish priests moved to the city of Ur, in Iraq, 5,600 years ago, where they created their story about how a new god had created this paradise and the first humans, Adam and Eve, as well as a talking snake 5,771 years ago. The reason these Brahmin priests left this first paradise was because it was destroyed in a massive flood. For thousands of years, the story of this first paradise was dismissed by the British overlords as just a story until it was found with the help of satellites by the Indians themselves in 2002. The satellite showed that the Harappan civilization and the rivers have been destroyed in a flood and an earthquake, which then must have inspired the Akkadians to write the story of Gilgamesh 5,500 years ago. The eldest translated story known to mankind that was then the foundation for the story of Noah's Ark later in the Bible. This is where the Bible catches up and tells us about the Brahmin priest, Taruk, who made Shiva idols out of clay and who named his son Abram after Brahma 5,400 years ago. Abram, of course, became Abraham, who married Sarai, named after Sarasvati, who became Sarah. He also took Hagar, named after Hagar, as his concubine, and he had two sons, Isaac and Ishmael. That in Sanskrit translates to Ish-Aku and Ish-Mahal, which means the great Shiva and the friend of Shiva. Still today, the Jews call it sitting Shiva when they mourn a dead close friend or relative. In the same way Judaism borrowed from Brahmanism, Christianity would borrow their Old Testament from the Jews and their Christ birth story from the Egyptian god Horus, who was born on December 25th, 5,500 years ago, from a virgin who had turned water into wine, healed cripples, and raised people from the dead, before he was crucified and resurrected on the third day. The Muslims, of course, built their religion on the stories of Judaism and Christianity, and they recognized both Abraham and Jesus. In Asia, the Buddhists, the Sikhs, and the Hindus all stand on the shoulders of Brahmin teachings, and also Zoroaster in Persia 2,600 years ago was inspired by Brahmanism. Religion started to lose its grip on people some 200 years ago, and here in the U.S., Thomas Jefferson created his own version of the Bible. In Iran, the Baha'i religion tried 150 years ago to bring all believers under one roof. And in Finland, 150 years ago, two old ladies called Natalia and Edith Maria created what they called good and humane rules that contributed to making Finland into the latest version of a paradise with a high standard of living and a safe society. In 2010, a paradise is a peaceful place where women are equal to men, where education and the standard of living are high, and where religion has lost its grip on people, according to Newsweek and the New York Times in their separate articles. Isn't it ironic that the Aryan people who were instrumental in creating the first paradise are at it again 6,000 years later in their homeland, Finland?